Hello friends, good morning and welcome to your Reset Live Lectures. Dear friends, as you know that we have started a series on organizational behavior, and today we are conducting yet another lecture in the same series. In today's lecture, we will try to understand the concept of classical organizational theories. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert, Dr. Namita Rajput. Dr. Rajput is Principal OSD of Sri Aurobindo College Evening of University of Delhi. Without further ado, I would like to welcome ma'am to our studios and request her to start the lecture. Welcome, ma'am.
So, good morning, friends. We have a very interesting topic called classical organization theory in the series of organization behavior. Now, starting with the main idea of the classical organization theory, which states that there is only one way to perform a task. Now, the classical organization theory espouses two perspectives. The first is scientific management and the second is administrative management. Now, coming on to the scientific management, it is basically the organization in which the management is organized in a very scientific manner, focusing on the management of the workers and of the work. Now, coming on to the second perspective of the classical organization theory is the administrative management. Now, addressing the issues concerning how overall organization should be structured. Now, basically, when you talk about the organizational classical theory, it states that how the organization has to be managed, how organization has to be structured, how the people and the work has to be managed in a very scientific manner. So, we discussed about the two perspectives of the classical organization theory. One, scientific management, and two, the administrative management. Both these perspectives are so important to manage the organizations of today that even the theories which have been propounded in the earlier years, they have a strong meaning and application in today's perspective also. Although there are sea changes which have taken place in the organization because of the liberalization, globalization and privatization. But yes, the perspectives which have been addressed in the yesteryears by the big management people, that is F.W. Taylor, Winslow Taylor, Henry Fayol, they all have a deep meaning as to how the organization has to be managed and how the organization behavior has to be contained in the present contemporary world. So, they have a deep meaning and even the applications are very, very practical these days also. So, taking it forward, let me give you the major contributions to the classical organization theory. The scientific management, the main contributor of the scientific management is Frederick Winslow Taylor. Whereas if you come on to the administrative management part of it, the first is the Henry Fayol, the second is the Luther Halsey Gulick, and the last is the Max Weber. So, we will be taking and discussing these in detail one by one. Now, let me give you some brief background of the Frederick Winslow Taylor and how he is able to propound the scientific theory of management, which is definitely a very important contribution in the world of the management. Now, the Taylor is born in Peninsula on March 20th, 1856. Then after studying in Europe, he plans to go to the Harvard University but does not pass the entrance exam. So, he had a strong conviction that he'll be able to clear the exam, but he could not do that. Now, instead, the Taylor started working as a pattern maker at a pump manufacturing company in Philadelphia. Now, later he studied the mechanical engineering at Stevens, finishing in just 3 years. Now, Taylor identifies two people as having influenced them. The first is the Lewis Sharp impresses the Taylor with his focus, concentration and task commitment, whereas the second is the John Grit teaches the Taylor how to be an appreciative, respectful and admirable working mechanic. Now, whatever famous management theories and the management propounder theorist they talk about. Definitely there is somebody or the other who must have influenced them in propounding that theory. So F.W. Winslow Taylor, who is considered as the father of scientific management, was basically influenced by two people. One was the Lewis Sharp and the second was the John Gritt. Now Lewis Sharp taught him very important lessons as to how to increase the focus, how the focus can be increased in the main perspective of the objectives, because if the focus is not there, then of course the achievement of the goals, achievement of the objectives is impossible task. Now of course they also taught, he was influenced by the Lewis also because of the, not only because of the focus also, but because of the concentration and the task commitment, because he was so committed to his task that this was a big lesson for F.W. Taylor. Although all these teachings and all the people who must have influenced in his life, they were the major contributors towards the scientific management which he propounded. So definitely all these teachings which were given to Taylor knowingly and unknowingly were instrumental in propounding the theory of scientific management. Now the John Gritt taught him as to how to be an appreciative, respectful and admirable working mechanic. Now definitely whenever you work, you need some appreciation, you need some respect, you need some admiration as a working mechanic. So this was given to him by John Gritt. So these were the two teachers of F.W. Winslow Taylor, who is the father of scientific management, who must have contributed a great in propounding the scientific theory of management. Now Taylor began working with the Mint Steel Company in 1878. While there he succeeds in doubling the work of his men, is soon promoted to a foreman, and as the foreman he begins studying the productive as a means of measuring of manufacturing. Later he became the chief engineer at Midway. So why this, the journey of success of F.W. Winslow Taylor is important? Because this is the base and the background of telling you how the scientific management can actually prove to be a boon for the organizations of today. That is the commitment, respectable, admirable attitude of the people. So all these things, they contribute a lot towards achieving the success in the organization, specifically about the concentration and the focus which were given to him by the two people, and they were the biggest blessings in the life of F.W. Taylor. The one was Lewis and the other was John Gritt. Now, we have seen here the success of the journey of F.W. Winslow Taylor, that when he joined a company, that is the Midwell Steel Company in 1878, so we can see that that person which he joined as, a very simple foreman was even taken to be as a chief engineer in the Midwell. That is, the success is so quick and so good that the overall success is contributed towards all the factors which were promoted into him by the people who were responsible for his success of the journey. Now, the ingenuity and accomplishments of F.W. Winslow Taylor now creates a system to gain maximum efficiency from the workers and machines in the factory. The focus is on time and motion studies to learn how to complete a task in at least amount of time. It becomes a consulting engineer for many companies, and he publishes the concept called the Principles of Scientific Management. So ingenuity and accomplishments was a major contributor in terms of he created a system in which the efficiency could be doubled, it could be enlarged, and he focused on the time studies and the motion studies. The time studies contributed in terms of how much time an individual will take to complete a particular task, and the motion was dealt with the human body movements in order to complete a particular task. So, going on and sitting on a seat and going to a factory or where the production unit is taken, then going for a lunch or going for a breaks. So all these things were measured in a very scientific manner, and he was able to give the results in terms of the time study and the motion study, that is how much time is the right time to complete a job and how much motion, that is the body movements, are required to complete a particular task. So the scientific management was overall centering around the motion studies and the time studies, which were the basic things in terms of accomplishments of the objectives of the organization. Now, Incorporating all these things into the organization structure, he became the chief consulting engineer for many of the organizations, and people used to like the concept which was given by him, and he was very, very popular in terms of a scientific management father. Now, he came out with a book called The Principles of Scientific Management, which contained a detailed insights of how to complete a task, what particular aspects are needed, how much time is required, how much motions are required, how the efficiency of the workers could be doubled, how much overall efforts can be doubled in terms of giving them some kind of an appreciation, applauding, etc. So all these things were scientifically measured and proved and were implemented in the organizations so that we could reap the fruits as far as possible. Now, coming on in this backdrop to the key points of the scientific management, let us have a look on this. The first is the scientific job analysis. Now, when you talk about the scientific job analysis, the observation, the data gathering, the careful measurement, it determines the one best way to perform each job. The second is the selection of personnel. The third is the management cooperation, and the fourth is the functional supervising. So basically in this particular slide we are talking about in detail the four aspects, the key aspects of the scientific management. So let me explain them one by one. The first is the scientific job analysis. Now here the concept of scientific job analysis incorporates that you are putting science into it, you are very, very objective in terms of analysis of a job, and that is the observation is the main aspect of it. Then they used to collect the data in terms of how, what, when, so that we have a deep insights of the job analysis, and it could be done to the best possible extent. Then it came on to the careful measurement of the job also, because if the job is not carefully measured, of course you will not be able to come on to the right conclusion as to how much time a particular job needs to be completed, because this is supposed to be a scientific management. So everything has to be very, very crystal clear in terms of the motion, in terms of the time, in terms of the efficiency levels, in terms of the efforts which are needed to complete a particular task. So overall this is what is called as a job analysis, that is right from the concept of a job, right from the collection of the data, then on to the final analysis of a job is done in a very scientific manner. The second is the selection of a personnel. The selection of a personnel is also very, very important key aspects of the scientific management in terms of scientifically selecting and of course giving them some kind of a training, teaching them and developing the workers. Now, as a matter of fact, when you join the organization, you are very raw in your work, you're very unpolished in your work. So the workers used to be polished in terms of giving them some kind of teaching, some kind of a training sessions. Then of course after training and giving them the teaching sessions in a scientific manner, the workers were developed. So this is also one of the key aspects, that is the selection of the personnel, that even if you're not selecting the personnel in a right way, but yes, you can develop the personnel also by giving them some kind of teaching and the training sessions. So the first basic key point in terms of the scientific management is that you are doing the job analysis in a scientific manner, that is no kind of subjectivity is involved in terms of analyzing a particular job. And the second is the selection of a personnel in terms of, that is whenever you are selecting the workers, even if they are not trained, you can always develop them, train them, teach them, so that they are becoming the valuable assets for the organization. Coming on to the third concept or the key concept of the scientific management, this is all about the management cooperation. The managers should cooperate with the workers to ensure that all work is done in accordance with the principles of science and develop the plan. So the manager here should cooperate with the workers with the principles of science that develop the plan. So the fourth aspect in terms of the key aspect of the scientific management is the functional supervising. Now the managers assume that they plan the work, they organize the work, there is a decision making activity, and that the workers perform the job. So whenever you talk about the functional supervising, it says that there are so many management functions of the organization. So the supervising again has to be in terms of the functional aspects of the business, like there is a planning aspect, there is a organizing aspect, there is a decision making aspect, and overall, whatever the workers, they perform the job, they are in terms of the functional supervising aspect. So till now we have discussed the four main key aspects of the scientific management. The first was analyzing the job in a scientific manner, then selection of the personnel, that is, even if the persons who are selected, they are not the great contributors, but by giving them some kind of teaching and training sessions, when we could develop the workers. Then third was the management cooperation, that is, the management should cooperate with the workers to ensure that whatever is the work done in accordance with the principles of the science, they develop the plan. The fourth is the functional supervising, that is, the managers, they supervise the work according to the functions which have been done in terms of planning, organizing, controlling, coordinating, decision making, etc. Now we are coming on to, this was in the beginning of my lecture I told you that there are basically two aspects of the classical organization theory which is the topic of today. The first aspect was the scientific management, which we have already discussed, that is, we gave you the story of the Frederick Winslow Taylor. What concepts and convictions did he give, and how did it prove to be a good aspect for the organization? And he came out with a book called The Principles of Scientific Management. We gave the journey of the success to him, and then finally the principles of the scientific management which we gave was the major contributor towards achieving the organizational aspects in a very scientific manner. Now we gave you the four concepts of the scientific management. The first was scientific job analysis, followed by the selection of personnel. The third is the management cooperation, and the fourth is the functional supervising. Now we are coming on to the administrative perspective of the classical theory of the organization behavior. The first is the theory which has been given by the Henry Fayol. Now he was an engineer and a French industrialist. Giving this a background and the backdrop is very, very important so that you understand what contributions did this management school of thoughts they are famous for, and how the contributions which have been given by them is even rightful and practical today also in the modern contemporary world of today. So we starting with this, the Henry Fayol was an engineer and he was a French industrialist. In France he worked as a managing director in coal mining organization. He recognizes to the management principles rather than the personal traits. While others shared their belief, Fayol was the first to identify management as a continuous process of evaluation. The contributions which are given by Henry Fayol are nonetheless, they are so fruitful and practical today. Also, the kind of convictions he gave, the kind of concepts he gave, the kind of thoughts he gave are very, very different from any other other school of thought of management. The first aspect which he gave was that he recognizes the management principles rather than the personal traits. That is, he gave more importance to the management principles rather than giving on to the personal traits of an individual, followed by he had his own beliefs and he used to identify the other aspects, in contrary to the Frederick Winslow Taylor, which gives more movement to the personal traits rather than the overall management principles, which is the center and the USP of Henry Fayol principles. That is, he gave more importance to the management principles rather than the personal traits of an individual. Now, Fayol 5 management functions are very, very famous. So let us do this in detail. The fundamental roles performed by all the managers. Now, in terms of the fundamental roles which are performed by the managers, the first is the planning, the second is the organizing, the third is the commanding, the fourth is coordinating, and the fifth is controlling. So we'll be doing in detail one by one. So as a matter of fact, when you join an organization as a manager, so there are certain basic issues, there are certain fundamental functions, there are certain fundamental activities and the actions which a manager has to take. Taking this backdrop, the first aspect is of course the planning, because planning is an activity which tells you where to go, how to go, when to do, who is to do, where is to be done. So all the whys, whos, wheres, they are answered in terms of the planning activity. Now, planning is one of the activity which bridges the gap as to where you are and where you want to go. It is primarily the base of every kind of an activity, which gives you in terms of what your action plans would be, what your the actions would be in terms of your future activities. So it is the base for every activity, and it is definitely a forward looking activity. Now, once you have planned your activities in terms of selection of a product, selection of a market, selection of a customer, selection of the basic activities which you want to go in for in terms of the business, that is whether you want to go in for a wholesale business, a retail business, a service business, a foreign trade business, and so on and so forth. So, when you talk about the planning, there are basic aspects which are very, very important to be considered here. And once the planning is done, 50% of the work is done. So planning is a very diligent activity, a very, intellectual activity, which is very, very important and has a deep analysis, has a deep work to be done, and there are certain preconditions also which have to be fulfilled, because the planning will depend upon your wish, the planning will depend upon your, the mind sessions which you must have put into, etc. So here we say that once you have planned the activities, the second is your organizing. So when you're talking about the organization activity, organizing is basically organizing the structure of the activity in terms of authority, responsibility, structure, in terms of what is the role, responsibilities of everyone. Neither the responsibility should be more, nor the authority should be more. So if there is some kind of an imbalance between the two, it is very, very fatal for the organization, because more of authority is very malicious in terms of that is the overall more of the authority will diminish the aspects of the organization. You will not be able to achieve the organizational goals, and you will misuse. So the misuse of the authority is very, very detrimental for the growth of the organization. So similarly, more of responsibilities will frustrate the people. So there has to be a very judicious balance, a trade-off between the authority and responsibility structure. In terms of basically, when you talk about the organizing, it it is basically dealing with the grouping of the activities. That is, which group will do what activity, etc. Now, the third is your commanding activity. The commanding activity is definitely action oriented. It will give you the commands of who is to do, what is to be done, at what time is to be done, that is a timeline, etc. Then is the coordination. So coordination is also the essence of management, in terms of if you're not able to coordinate any activity, definitely you should see yourself as a Titanic ship, and everything, whatever you have done, will be multiplied by 0. So coordination is very, very important. And if the production department is producing and producing and producing, there are no sales. So ultimately there is a waste of resources. The financial activity is also down the drain, and whatever you are producing will be just a stock. You will not be able to convert the stock into money. So overall, working of the various departments, the coordination between them is the essence and is action oriented, of course, and overall coordination is primarily required to retain the people in the organization, to multiply the money in the organization, to achieve the organizational goals, to enhance the profits, etc. Now, the last is your controlling. So when you talk about these 6 activities, they are the basic activities for any kind of a manager. So controlling is basically a backward and a forward activity both, in terms of, because the base is provided by planning, and basically controlling starts with what your objectives are, what is your present performance. Then there is a comparison between the standards which you have already fixed and the actual performance, and you try to find out the deviations. The deviations could be positive, the deviations could be negative, and sometimes you are able to have only the kind of standards which you have already fixed for the organization. So even if these standards are more, it is bad. Even if the standards are achieved is less, is also bad. That means you are undermining yourself. So basically, if you are not able to achieve these standards, and sometimes you are over achieving your standards, both need corrective action. So here the role of the manager, the role of the decision making authority, the competent authority becomes more imperative in nature, more diligent in nature, more corrective in nature, because if you are not able to put in your best efforts in terms of selection of all these things, you will not be able to achieve the organizational success. So the controlling activity is basically very, very important. It starts with planning, the second step is measuring, the fourth step is a comparison, and the final step is your overall corrective action, which is definitely required to put everything in perspective and on the right path. Now additionally, besides these basic principles which every manager has to perform, the FIOL recognizes 14 general principles that should guide the management of the organization, and these things are so important from the organization point of view that besides having these 5 perspectives, the additional 14 principles which are given by the Henry Fayol are also very, very important from the organizational point of view. Now we will be talking about these 14 principles one by one. So the first principle, which has been given by Henry Fayol, is the division of work. Now when there is a division of work, it improves the efficiency through a reduction of waste, increased output, simplification of job training. Second is the authority and responsibility. Authority, the right to give orders and the power to extract the obedience. Responsibility, the obligation to carry out the assigned duties. The third is the discipline, that is respect for rules that govern the organization. So since these additional general principles which have been given by Fayol are so important because they are instrumental in achieving the organizational success. The first is the division of work. Unless and until there is a division of work, the efficiency cannot come, because one person will be overburdened in terms of doing the activities. He will not be able to justify any kind of action which is being done by him. So if there is a division of work, the efficiency will creep in. There is an optimization of time, there is an optimization of resources, and there is a simplification of job. So all these parameters are very, very important because unless and until they are put in order, the organizational objectives cannot be achieved in that organization. The second is your authority and responsibility. The authority and responsibility talks about the structure of the organization in terms of who is responsible for what, and overall what is the criteria of taking into consideration the parameters which are relating to authority and the parameters relating to responsibility. The authority is a kind of a the kind of a delegation in terms of the person who is on the highest person in the hierarchy will have the highest authority. He can delegate the authority onto his subordinates. So when he is doing this, this is called as a decentralization of authority. So whether the decentralization is important, centralization is important, which suits the organization. If the size is more, of course, the delegation is important. If the size is less, centralization is important. Then, of course, you have to make a parity between the responsibility and the authority, both, because both should be in order and in parity with each other, in trade-off with each other, in equality of each other. If any of these parameters is unequal, then it is going to create a lot of problems for the organization. Then is the discipline, that is, what are the bylaws of the organization and what are the rules of the organizations according to which the organization will be governed. So out of 14 principles in this session, we have done only the 3 principles. The next, the principles will be taken in the next session. Thank you so much. we are discussing in this session the classical theory of management. In this aspect, in the earlier session we discussed the scientific management of principles, which was given by Winslow Taylor, his journey of success, what parameters were important for him in terms of the scientific management were taken into view. Then we started now with the 4 principles, the 14 general principles, and before we discuss these 14 principles, I gave you the 6 general principles which are overall the role which are fundamental in terms of the managers. The first which we discussed was the planning, the second was organizing, the third is commanding, the fourth is coordinating, and the fifth is controlling. Now these are the 6 activities which is done by all types of managers, and they are general in nature. Now we are discussing now the 14 general additional principles which the Henry Fayol has given, and they have a general applicability in the organizations of today. Now the first principle which we discussed is the division of work. That is, unless and until we divide the work, we will not be able to give justice, and there will be a reduction of waste, there will be increase in output, and the simplification of job training. Then we did the concept called authority responsibility, in which how to give the orders, how to structure the organization, what kind of responsibilities are there, etc. were discussed. Then we came on to the love for discipline, that is, whatever are the bylaws, whatever are the rules and the regulations, they are followed in the organization. Now coming on to the 4th important general principle of management which has been given by Henry Fayol is the unity of command. Now in terms of the unity of command, an employee should receive the orders from one superior only. This 5th is the unity of direction, that is, grouping of similar activities that are directed to a single goal under one manager. Then we have subordination of individual interest to the general interest, and the 7th is the remuneration of personnel, and the 8th is the centralization. Now these principles, they need explanation. The first which I would like to explain here is the unity of command. That is, an employee, there are so many employees in an organization, and there are so many superiors, there are so many subordinates as a part of the organization structure. So when it comes to explanation of the unity of command, it states that what? Subordinate should be receiving the orders from one superior only. Because if he is getting the orders from n number of people, there will be a chaotic situation. He will not be able to give justice to anyone for that matter. And of course, there will be a multiplicity of the orders. So maybe he is able to service only few, and he is able to left even the few, which is definitely not good, creates a sign of disobedience, insubordination in that case. So as a matter of fact, Henry Fayol states that if a subordinate receives the orders from one superior only, he'll be able to do a lot of justice, he'll be able to produce the maximum, he'll be more efficient in nature. The second aspect which I want to discuss here is the 5th principle of Henry Fayol, that is the unity of direction. Now in terms of grouping of similar activities that are directed to a single goal under one manager. Now this particular unity of direction states that there should be one head and one goal. That is, even we have departmental objectives, but whatever objectives you set in terms of the department, there should be overall directed towards achieving the one single goal, that is the organizational goal overall. So there should be one head and one plan. Now the 6th is the subordination of individual interest to the general interest. Now this particular concept of subordination of individual interest to general interest, it states that anything which is suiting the organization for overall interest of the organization as a whole should be implemented. But yes, if any kind of a necessary action which has been taken by the organizations is suiting only few individuals or one individual, should be not considered and should be always in subordination. And the superior aspect is that any action which is suiting the organization as a whole should be taken into consideration, rather than the organizations which is suiting only the few organizations, only the few people. So this is a very important aspect of the general principles of Henry Fayol. Then coming on to the remuneration of the personnel. Now in terms of the remuneration of the personnel, it plays a pivotal role in terms of the labor turnover. The payment of the workers should be in proportion of the work done by them. There should be a quality of fairness. There should be a quality of satisfaction. Now, in terms of the fairness, it means that whatever amount of work you are taking from the workers, they should be paid accordingly. And in terms of the satisfaction, that whatever payment is given by the organization to the workers, they are happy with that. So, both the parameters are very, very important in this regard. Now, the next is your centralization. Now, the managers retain the financial responsibility, subordinates the main enough responsibility to accomplish their task. Now, coming on to the next principle, that is the scalar chain. Now, in terms of calling as a scalar chain, it is a chain of command which flows from top to bottom. That is a line of authority. The chain of command from ultimate authority to the lowest authority. The second is your order, that is people and supplies should be in right place and at the right time. Now, 11th is your equity, that is the managers should treat employees fairly and equally. Then it comes to the stability of tenure of the personnels, the managerial practices that encourage the long-term commitment from the employees. They create a stable workforce and therefore a successful organization. The 13th is initiative. Employees should be encouraged to develop and carry out the improvement plans. 14th is esprit de corps, that is, the managers should foster and maintain the teamwork, team spirit and a sense of unity among the employees. Now we have to discuss these principles one by one because although they were made in very, very long period of time in the yesteryears, but their applicability is very, very important these days also because they are made in such a way that the principles, if we adopt in the organization, they can create a lot of wonders in the organization. You'll be able to achieve the organizational goal, you'll be able to take the organization on the road of success, etc. So we have discussed the scalar chain, that is a chain of command which flows from top to bottom, and of course nobody should be able to break that chain of command. If there is an emergency, then of course you can fill a gangplank and talk horizontally also, but that is only in case of the emergencies. But yes, in all other matters, you should not be able to break that chain of command. Now coming on to the order, that is the people and the supplies should be in right place and at the right time, because if there is a problem in terms of the people, in terms of the placement of the things, then everything will be in a chaotic situation, which is not good for the organizational goals and organizational profits, etc. Then is the equity. You know, there are few number of cases in which it is observed that the managers are not fair with their employees. So this particular equity, if it is implemented in the organization, and is a very important and a core principle of the organizations of today, which has been propounded by Henry Fayol, that is, if the manager is equitable in his nature, in his treatment of the employees in a fairly and equally manner, then of course the organizational climate would be good, the organization behavior would be affected in a very positive manner. Now there is a next principle which is 12th, that is the stability of tenure of a personnel. Now when you talk about the stability of tenure of a personnel, it means that if I join an organization and if I am not sure about my tenure, then of course there will always be a thought which is revolving around that person, that maybe today is my last day. So if this kind of stability is not given to them, he will not be able to put his 100%. So some kind of stability in his tenure, that is whether it is a contractual employment, whether his employment is for 5 years, maybe it is for a quarter, maybe for a month, maybe for a week, or it could be a daily. Whatever is the scenario and the status of the organization must be very clearly told to the employee, because it affects his psyche, it affects his mindset, it affects his action, it affects his success, it affects his organizational achievement of the goals also. So there is a strong spillover of the stability of tenure onto so many things, and so many things are triggered. If he is permanent, if his stability is fixed and he is very sure about his stay in that organization, he'll be happy to put his heart and soul, and overall organizational success would be achieved very, very quickly. Next is your initiative. Now, employees should be encouraged to develop and carry out the improvement plans to whatever extent possible. And if he is not able to take the initiative, his initiative is marred. He will not be able to have any kind of creativity. He will not be an asset for the organization. So many do's and don'ts should not be put on to an employee, and a kind of a free rein should be given to him. A kind of a free environment is given to him so that he is able to put in his best creativity levels. He is able to take the lot of initiative at his level, and so that the organizational goals could be achieved to the best possible extent. Next is the 14th principle is your esprit de corps. Now, as the name suggests, the esprit de corps means union is strength. That is, he should try and create an atmosphere in which there is a team building, there is an overall consensus, there should not be any kind of an enmity, there should not be any kind of a punitive atmosphere, and the overall culture is very friendly, having lot of consensus into it, having lot of appreciation, applauding, favorable conditions, no enmity. So if he is able to create that, if he is able to create that team spirit, then of course the organizational climate would be good. So till now we have discussed the 14 general fuel principles, which are very important and instrumental in achieving the organizational goals, followed by the 6 general principles which every manager of any kind of an organization has to perform. So let me give you a recap of those 6 general principles and 14 important principles which have been given by Henry Fayol. Now, coming on to the Fayol's management functions, the first was the planning, which is definitely a prerequisite and very, very important. Planning deals with what to do, how to do, when to do, followed by organizing, which follows with the organizational authority responsibility structure. The third is your commanding, that is the overall, the action function of the organization, followed by coordination, because coordination is the essence of the organization. And of course, the last step and the general function of that management is controlling. That is, what is the present scenario, what are the standards, then a comparison between the standards and the actuals, and then followed by taking a corrective action. The corrective action could be positive and the corrective action could be negative. Now, these are the general fundamental roles which the managers of today have to play in any type of organization. Then we discussed the 14 general principles of the management. In this, the first we discussed was the division of work, that unless and until there is a division of work, people will not be able to give their justification, because everyone cannot be perfect in every field. So there has to be a judicious distribution of the work at different levels. Then followed by the organization structure, authority and responsibility. The authority is, the overall command or the decision making power, or taking or following the orders, whereas the responsibility is a kind of an obligation which everyone has to do. So this particular principle states that authority and responsibility structure should be in parity with each other. Then is a discipline, that is, you should have a respect for the rules which govern the organization. Then we had a unity of command, that is, every superior every subordinate should receive orders from only one superior, otherwise it will be a very chaotic situation. He would not understand whom to follow, whom not to follow. Then we have a unity of direction, which states, and the crux of this principle is one head and one plan, followed by subordination of individual interest to general interest. It states that we should give more importance to those particular activities which is of general interest and ignoring those activities which are general in nature. Then we have remuneration of the personals in terms of giving them a judicious payment, in terms of giving them a fair payment, in terms of the proportion of the work which they have to do. Then we have a centralization, that is, the management should retain the final responsibility, subordination, maintain enough responsibility to accomplish their task. So overall, the next aspect is the scalar chain, which is a line of authority which flows from top to bottom. In case of an emergency, this line of chain or line of authority can be broken by filling a form called gangplank. Then we have order. Order means that the people and the supplies should be in right place and at a right time. Then we have an equity, that is, the managers should give equal treatment in terms of fairness and equality. followed by stability of tenure of the personnel, that is, you should be having enough time that yes, we are there in this organization for X period, because there is definitely a negative spillover also in this regard. Then we have initiative, that is, the employee should be given a free hand to take any kind of an initiative at every levels. Then we have esprit de corps, that is, the manager should foster an environment in which he is able to develop a teamwork, a team spirit, a friendly environment, a congenial environment. So overall, if all these things are required, all these things are followed, the organization success is definite. Now coming on to the next, the aspect, that is not the general but the administrative aspect of the classical theory of the management, is by the Luther Halsey Gulick. Now he was born on 1892 and he died in 1992. He is a specialist in municipal finance and administration. The Gulick works with the Institute of Public Administration. He was a professor of municipal sciences and administration at Columbia, serves on Franklin D. Roosevelt Committee of Government Administration, and expands the FUEL 5 management principles into 7 functions. So this is most important, that the work which has been contributed by Luther Halsey is definitely an extension of Henry Fayol general principles of management, which were 5 in number. He gave us 7 in number. So the work of the Henry Fayol was enriched, it was enlarged, it was broadened by the Gulick. So let us see what kind of extensions and his contributions as he is given in terms of controlling the organizations and the management of organizations of today. The first is the planning, second is organizing, third is staffing, and the fourth is directing. The first is the planning. It is basically developing an outline of the things that must be accomplished and the methods for accomplishing them. The second is the organizing. It establishes the formal structure of authority through which the work subdivisions are arranged, defined, and coordinated to implement the plan. Third is staffing, that is selection, training, and developing the staff and maintaining a favorable working conditions. Fourth is the direction, that is, it is a continuous task of making the decisions, communicating and implementing decisions, and evaluating the subordinates properly. So we will be discussing these one by one. In terms of planning, which as we have already discussed, it is basically chalking out a plan, an action plan for the organization. That is, what are the particular methods which will be followed to accomplish the organizational objectives. The second is the organizing, that is, you are talking about the formal structure of authority and responsibility, how it is arranged, how it is implemented, etc. Then we have a staffing, that is, once you have chalked out the plan, you have a structure, then you will be placing the right people at the right place and at the right time. This is called as staffing. So staffing is basically creating, selecting, developing the staff, maintaining a favorable working condition in this regard. Then we have directing. Directing is basically a continuous mentoring system, a continuous making of decision making, a continuous system of communicating, a continuous system of implementing and evaluating the subordinates very, very properly. The next is your coordinating. Coordinating, as we have already discussed, it is basically all the activities and the efforts needed to bind together the organization in order to achieve a common goal. The sixth is your reporting. It verifies the progress through records, research, inspection, ensures that the things happen according to a plan. It takes any corrective action when necessary and keeps those to work with the chief executive is responsible and informed. Then we have budgeting, that is all activities that accomplish the budgeting, including the fiscal planning, accounting and control. So what difference is given by the Henry Fayol and by the Luther is that he has given additional 2 functions, that is in terms of reporting and budgeting. Now reporting and budgeting is very, very important aspect of the organizations of today, because we will be able to have in black and white what we have been doing, how we have been doing, whether we are increasing or we are on a decreasing side, whether we are performing well or not. So unless and until anything is measured, we are not able to take any kind of a corrective action nicely. So these are the two additional parameters which has been given by Luther in terms of adding to the work of the Henry Fayol in terms of budgeting and in terms of reporting. Budgeting is also very important aspect and the function, because you will be able to have in advance a plan of your expenses and your revenues. The next is by Max Weber. Let us have a look on this. He was born on 1864 and died in 1920. He was a German psychologist, sociologist. He first describes the concept of bureaucracy, an ideal form of organizational structure. He defines the bureaucratic administration as the exercise of control on the basis of knowledge. The Weber states the power is principally exemplified within the organizations by the process of control. Now, Weber uses and defines the terms authority and power as: power is any kind of a relationship within which one person could impose his will regardless of any resistance from the other. The second is authority, which existed when there was a belief in the legitimacy of that power. Weber classifies the whole aspects according to the legitimacy of the powers and the uses of these basic classifications. The first is the charismatic authority, the second is the traditional authority, the third is the rational legal authority. So we will be discussing all these one by one. Now, when you talk about the charismatic authority, it is based on the sacred and outstanding characteristics of an individual, and that is why he is called as a charismatic individual. Followed by traditional authority, it essentially is a respect for the customs, followed by the rational legal authority, which is based on a code or a set of rules. Now, the Weber recognizes the rational legal authority is used in the most efficient form of organization because a legal code can be established which can claim obedience from the members of the organization. The law is a system of abstract rules which are applied to particular cases, and administration looks after the interest of the organization within the limits of that law. The manager or the authority additionally follows the impersonal order. The membership is the key of law obedience. Obedience is derived not from a person administrating the law, but rather to the impersonal order that installed the personal capacity. The Weber outlined his ideal bureaucracy as defined by the following parameters. The first is that it is a continuous system of the authorized jobs maintained by the regulations, followed by specialization. It encompasses a defined sphere of competence based on its division of labor. The third is a stated chain of command of offices, a consistent organization of supervision based on distinctive level of authority. Now, coming on to the other aspect of it, that is the rules. It is an encompassing system of directives which govern the organization, govern the behavior. The rules may require training to comprehend and manage. And of course, the impersonality, that is no partiality either for or against the clients or the workers or the administrators. The next is your free selection of appointed officials, which states the equal opportunity based on education and the professional qualifications. The full-time payment officials not only as a major employment paid on the basis of the position, the career officials, that is the promotion based on the seniority and the merit designated by the superiors. The private-public split separates the business and the private life. The finances and interest of the two should be kept firmly apart. The resources of the organizations are quite distinct from those of the members as the private individuals. And of course, coming on to the three major aspects, that is A, B and C. A tends to be a tendency of leveling of the social classes by allowing a wide range of recruitments and technical competence to be taken by any organization. The second is your elite status, because of which the time required to achieve the necessary technical training for them. Then of course the third is the greater degree of social equality due to the obedience of the spirit and impartiality or objectivity. Now coming on to the last part of the lecture, that is the common criticism of the classical theory. The classical theory we have discussed in details in terms of the scientific management, in terms of the administration, and taking into view the contributions of the Luther, the contributions of the Fayol and the other school of management thought. So coming on to the final part, that is the criticism. The classical theory principles of the formal organization may lead to a work environment in which employees have minimal power over their jobs and working conditions. So the first is a very important criticism, that the employees, they do not have the power. Second is the subordination, passivity and dependence are expected. Work to a short-term perspective, employees lead to a mediocrity. The working conditions produced by the psychological failures as a result of the belief that they are lower class employees performing the minimal task. So overall, the organization theory, the importance given to the workers is minimal. They are not given any kind of importance. Their perspective is short term in nature, and of course whatever they do, they are into a process of mediocrity in which they cannot rise and shine, because they are always into one aspect or the other. So overall, there is a lot of criticism as far as the classical theory is concerned, which needs a deep discussion. So in just a few lines, I'll be completing this part of my lecture. That is, if the employees are given a minimal power, they do not feel empowered. So this is the biggest problem in terms of the classical theory of the organization, is that the organization employees are not given the kind of power they should be given. Then of course in terms of their jobs, in terms of their working conditions, and definitely we always talk about the subordination, we always talk about the obedience, we always talk about what is expected out of them, but this is all short term perspectives. So it has to be broadened if this theory has to be implemented in a larger way. Then of course whatever action function they are doing, they are just taking and leading towards the mediocrity. They are not moving on to the superiority, which is the biggest flaw of this classical theory of the management, followed by the working conditions produced by the psychological failures as a result of the belief that they are lower class employees performing the minimal task. So this kind of the psyche is affected, which is very, very damaging for the individual, because he has to put in his best efforts. But if he have this kind of a psyche and opinion, he will not be able to put in his best efforts, etc. So with these words, I say thank you so much.
And dear friends, we hope that with today's lecture you were able to understand in a better way classical organization theory. On that note, we would like to thank Dr. Nabita Rajput for coming here and delivering this wonderful lecture. And thank you, dear friends, for watching our lecture. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.